Jai Bhim Paul, thank you for this time for this interview. We have a few questions for you, particularly regarding the whole legislation for the SEP and TSP in India. My first question is, like these provisions for SEP for scheduled castes and tribal sub-plan for Adivasis has been there in India for a long time. It would be good if you could just explain to us what is the need now for this special legislation.
The policy has been made for the tribals since 1974-75 and for the scheduled caste since 1979-80. So which means almost 34 years for Dalits and around 39 years for the tribals. It has been already formulated. And this policy that has been formulated, even though it has been very clearly specified as to how it needs to be implemented, designs, somehow it has not found its way into ensuring that the broader society participates in the planning and and is transparent. The schemes are transparent to the people and they are accountable. So especially when the marginalized communities do not have participation in the planning and in implementing and in account and holding those who are implementing accountable, very difficult for those schemes to be grounded in reality. So that was what has happened. So allocations have not been made. The designs of the scheme have not been properly done as per the needs, and therefore money has disappeared.
Could you please highlight the main key aspects or dimensions of this proposed bill?
The bill primarily emphasizes on communities' right to plan. It's not just a question of money. It's not just a question of utilizing a few schemes. It primarily encourages and places before the community, especially here scheduled castes and tribals, Adivasis, Dalits, to say they have a right in planning. It also says that in the participation of the planning, that there is clearly the state or the central government has certain functions to do, which is setting aside the money and designing schemes which directly address the needs of individuals, families, or the location they are calling basti, or not the panchayat, the area where the scheduled castes or the tribals are living.
This you're talking about the central legislation, the draft bill. What we have news that Andhra Pradesh already has state legislation in place. Could you please highlight the strengths, weaknesses? What are the implications of this bill as you see it in Andhra Pradesh?
This is historic. What Andhra Pradesh has got is a historic legislation, and they have brought it in January 2013. What it says is, first, the government, state government forms a state council. Then all the departments, especially the planning department and the finance department, needs to inform the council 6 months before the commencement of the year. So which means it's not just a ad hoc thing. 6 months before the financial year begins, they have to indicate the possible quantum of amount that is available for the Ministry of Department of SCs and Department of Tribals. What is the amount that is available with which they can plan. And then this ministry then directs to different ministries like Department of Women, Department of Children, Department of Highways, Department of Irrigation, all telecommunications. So you are looking at all these departments saying that now this money is available for you to plan very clearly for the development of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and then they have to come up with the schemes. Then how it will be implemented, and then bill says that it can be implemented only for individuals, families or villages. Then there is one lacune which we'll have to recognize that the Andhra Pradesh bill has. One, it has provision saying that in a general scheme, proportion of the scheduled castes that this general scheme may benefit, the same proportion may be deducted or considered as part of the special component plan or tribal subplan. This is a major weakness. I think the government is, and we are asking the government to reconsider, because that means it is nowhere different from the typical planning that the departments have been doing. They have been planning for everybody, and it has become an accounting exercise to say that 24% are there in the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, 24% of the entire Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan you treat it as a SAP and TSP, without specifically looking at how scheduled castes or scheduled tribes are being developed or benefited through this scheme. The second lacunae that the Andhra Pradesh bill has is that the infrastructure, certain amount the government can decide through a specific order, government order, saying that overall certain amount will be set aside as infrastructure costs, which will be regarded as being spent and utilized by the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. We are also hotly contesting this, because if you have general infrastructure that is also supposed to be meant, like for example airports, railway stations, Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium here in Delhi, all these have been clearly diversions of the scheduled caste money in the budgets. So these two lacunae I think are there, but then the overall right to plan, overall right of the communities to be part of the planning exercise has been given through this legislation.
Well, this whole question of equity, and particularly when we know for a fact that Dalit and Adivasi women perhaps are having one of the lowest human development indicators in the whole world. Do you see that as a gap in the current bill right now, and do you think that would be a challenge to get the whole gender aspect involved into the crux and core of this legislation?
What Ministry of Social Justice has come up with their bill, and the National Coalition for SCP-TSP legislation, you may have heard, is a coalition over 350 networks, organizations, movements, which has come together to look at this bill. We have given these four major feedback and our demands to be brought into the bill. First, we said that in all this, there is no mention of specific processes that ensure both participation and involvement of women. Here it has to be Adivasi women and the Dalit women. And not just participation, but the schemes have to be designed in such a way that the specific needs and addresses and issues of the Dalit women, Adivasi women should be considered as the primary target. Then the fourth thing is that apart from the schemes and the participation, that the quantum of amount that you allocate for the Dalit women should also be equal. So participation, then the schemes and quantum of amount. I think these are the three aspects that we felt, and this is the major lacunae, and we need to ensure that this comes into the legislation.
Could you comment on the monitoring and auditing mechanisms and how that would be addressed at the state and national level?
In the Andhra bill, this is also one of the concerns that we have raised, that the accountability of the duty bearers and accountability of the officials has not been sufficiently addressed. You know that one, in a broad rights-based framework, especially where the most vulnerable are considered, you need to make a leverage, you need to make those entitlements and rights which are realizable. Now that can only be possible if the accountability in terms of time, when they will ensure that this planning or the implementation specifically at different levels will be done by the officials, And if in case they default or they deviate or they deny, what are the mechanisms that are available that the ordinary citizen or a user will be able to actually take responsibility for demanding the schemes? I think that has not been there. You may have heard that there is a grievance redressal bill that is coming up, and we have tried to see that some of those provisions are also taken up, because that is also a bill that is drafted and is waiting for clearance at the cabinet.
We have media reports that this bill is likely to be introduced in the winter session beginning on December 5th. Would like to hear from you, what are the plans and responses of various Dalit and Adivasi organizations and also the coalition on building pressure on the UPA government to get this bill out?
The demand for this bill has been for the last 2 years by several organizations individually and by the coalition over the 1.5 years. What has been the practice, as most governments do, they become hyperactive during the time or just before the time of the elections. So we've also felt strategically it is necessary to demand this at this very critical time, because this is a time when people's voice have much more of a weightage, and we can also demand what is our due share. So the draft has been done. Ministry of Tribal Affairs still has to give their response to this. The inter-ministerial committee responses have to come to the draft that is being circulated by the Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment. We are hoping that in the coming week it will go to the cabinet, and cabinet should consider it and clear it. By 1st December, it should be indicated to the Parliament Secretary that this bill is going to come, because 5th December the Parliament is opening for its winter session, and as many of us know, this is the last working Parliament before the elections, because the next budget session is going to be a very technical session where none of the schemes are allowed to be considered. So this is our last chance for pushing, and for the government also, we feel it's a last chance to genuinely say that if any party is really concerned about the broader overall development of the country, especially looking at the development of the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes who can trigger the development of the country, this is one act which is critical, which is not just an act in itself, but it's a trigger act which can stimulate really the development and growth of this country.
Have you planned any mass action programs or any public programs in this regard? We have
been doing it since now. We have actually on November 15th, which is Birsa Munda Day, we have had several dharnas, presentations and meetings, public meetings, conferences, and gave this appeal to the chief ministers or the governors and sent it to the Prime Minister. And right from Jammu to Tamil Nadu and in Orissa, Bihar and in Maharashtra, across the states that we've had this, from 26th Constitution Day, 100 eminent persons are going to make an appeal which will be released to the press. And on the 3rd December, all the political parties have given their date where they'll come together to express their commitment to pass this bill. But we feel a mass action is also necessary. So from 5th December onwards, when the Parliament is to be open, children by thousands have come to the streets on the first day. Urban poor and urban Dalit Adivasis are going to come on the second day. The trade unions, SC/ST associations are coming on the 7th, demanding the SC/PTSB bill. The several cultural expressions of the Adivasis and Dalits are coming with their instruments, with their slogans, protesting as to why the denial has happened and demanding the thing. And on the 9th, the youth and students are coming together and saying that we as students, citizens not of tomorrow but today, that we want this bill. And finally, women, agricultural workers, labor are coming on the 10th, and hopefully on the 11th onwards, we will go still, if the bill is not passed, and then we will go on a hunger strike to see that the anguish of the community and the demand for a rightful share in the budgets and resources will be realized.
Looks like you have a very action-packed few weeks ahead for you. I have one more question on landlessness. As you know, is a huge question for both Adivasi and Dalit communities, and they have been continuously being obstructed from gaining access to rights over land. What are your thoughts on this, and how would access to land and land rights particularly be incorporated in the planning through SEP, TSP? Is that a possibility at all?
Definitely. I think one of the key demands is land, livelihood and land related asset building, because that's where most of the Dalits and Adivasis are. On the other hand, there's a sizable Dalits and Adivasis who continuously migrate to urban areas. Actually, most of the Dalits and Adivasis, 50% of the time where land is access to, they don't have access to land because of either agriculture is not being there, or being most of the time they're dependent on the rainfall. They migrate, as you know, there's a massive migration to both medium towns and cities, and there they involve in different types of unorganized work. And we are asking the Planning Commission and each department that not to only focus on traditionally so-called, whenever they think of Dalits, they only think of Dalit as an agricultural area. But you will know, for our information, that there are more higher educated youth among scheduled castes than there are among the Brahmins today. But very few schemes are being designed to see how their resource can be harnessed and engaged, and they can become really part of the cutting edge economy of this country. We don't see them as people who will link the agriculture onto the emerging economies, who will bring livelihoods, not just as some selling totapura, all these agricultural vegetables, but are also being part of the micro, nano industries that are there in almost all the cities. And people see them as only as small leather things, stitching. That's not the picture. The emerging assertion of the Dalit youth is there is a sizable amount, and they are still connected to their families in the traditional sector. So we are saying, don't only focus on the traditional sectors. Put your effort also into the cutting edge economy of the growth. Of course, bringing in sustainability, bringing in seeing that displacement and other things are also brought in, so that politically and technologically that we are correct and we include people and their lives and their future first in the development.
Well, my final question, I'm sure that you will agree there is no dearth of policies right now in this country of ours. With this legislation and the effective implementation in the future, do you see a beacon of hope for real economic justice for the scheduled tribes and scheduled caste people of India?
Thanks, Asha, for bringing this whole major aspect. I feel I would rather come from the community side. I don't expect anything from the state, because if they have not done for the past 60 years, there is no need for us to really trust the state that they will liberate the Dalits. No. I think, as Baba Sahib had said, and as many of the Dalit tribes said, we don't wait for any state or God to relieve us. What this act gives us is right to plan, right to resources. We will hold them accountable through this right. Government may not implement it, but this is one which are opening up our demand, not only dignity, not only freedom from fear or freedom from violence, but we are saying that we as human beings are capable are not only capable, we have shown that the economy is being upheld by us, but you have excluded us from the economy. So through this SCP TSP, we have a right to plan, not just the traditional areas, that we have a right to see that these are implemented wherever. So the responsibility of holding them accountable falls on us. Because I don't see, till now, they have not implemented it. So suddenly I don't see that they'll become very larger and very sweet and oozing towards Dalits and Adivasis. But because we have risen and we continue to assert our rights, we will continue to see that we will plan, and we will not let this planning be limited to some of these officials, but we will plan, we will decide, we will participate, and we will audit how this legislation is going to be done.
Thank you. More power to you and to the coalition, and Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.